We're going over to Matthew 26 and verse number 31. I'm just going to read the one verse, but we're going to go down through there and take it verse by verse. We're preaching on the final week of the Lord, His Passion Week, when He started His suffering and the burden of our sin upon Him, and the burden of His dying for our sin, going to the grave, resurrecting the third day. So it's going to take us several weeks to get through that. But this morning we're going to talk about Peter's denial. Peter's denial. Now, if I say betrayal instead of denial, forgive me, because I know Peter didn't betray the Lord. But when I was reading about this and going over my notes, I kept thinking betrayal, and don't fault me too much if I say betrayal. But actually, he didn't betray the Lord. He denied the Lord. Look at verse 31 now. Then saith Jesus unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. Our Father, we look back at the last week of the Lord and how horrible that week really was to the Lord in the flesh. But it's something that had to be done, and you were willing, out of your love for us, you were willing to give your only begotten Son, that He would die in our place, pay for our sins, go to the grave, and have victory over that by resurrecting from the dead the third day according to the Scriptures. We thank you for that, Lord, and your love for us, and how that you come to us, convicted us of our sins, brought us to faith in the Lord Jesus, and by faith we can be saved and have eternal life. And bless those today who might need to trust you. May the Holy Spirit touch their hearts, and may they come to know Jesus today. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. Point number one, as you can see in your bulletin, is the prediction of the denial. We just read that in verse number 31. Jesus said to them, that's the 11 disciples, or we call them apostles, which are the called out ones, or the specially called ones. And He said, you're going to be offended at me this night. Now, if you can just imagine the apostles, how much they loved the Lord, how much they depended on the Lord, how much they loved His just being, His company, being with Him and listening to Him and singing with Him and eating with Him and sleeping with Him and walking with Him and seeing all the things that the Lord is doing. And their relationship is probably beyond our comprehension, how close they were to the Lord. And then He comes up with this. This very night, He said, you, plural, you're going to be offended in me. He didn't say, Peter, you are going to be offended in me. It says, all ye shall be offended in me. Sometimes we give Peter too much credit for being a bad boy, when all the disciples many times had the same attitude and would have done the same thing in the same situation that Peter did. Or Peter was a little more outward than the others, and so we sort of expect it out of Peter in a way. It was to all of them. He said this to all of them. And He said, as it is written. Now, you probably won't have time to turn here, but Zechariah 13, verse 7 says, Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, saith the Lord of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. In other words, I will smite the shepherd, and He says, and the sheep will be scattered. Well, that's exactly what happened. Fulfillment of Scripture. Isn't it wonderful how when we read the New Testament, every time, if you start reading in the book of Matthew and you stop every time it says, as it is written, or as Isaiah said, or something, and go back and look up those Scriptures, you're going to be busy in the first 2 or 3 chapters of Matthew, and actually all the way through the Gospels, and even through the rest of the New Testament, because about 40% of the New Testament is Old Testament. I told that to a guy here one time. He said, I believe in the New Bible. I don't believe in the Old Bible. And I knew what he meant. I said, you don't believe in the Old Testament? He said, that's done away with. That's all done away with. And I said, well, then why is the New Testament, about 40% of it, the Old Testament? He said, what? And I said, well, you look up those references. Every time it says, as the Scriptures say, or as it is written in the Scriptures, and as Moses said, and all that. I said, what is that? He said, I guess it's the Old Testament. So he left. He never did come back after that, but he was just a visitor. So I don't know what they ever did with that. But it's important because the Lord came to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament, and that's exactly what he did. Now verse 32 says, but after I am risen again, I will go before you in Galilee. Now he said you're going to be offended. But then he gives them encouragement. And he says, when I'm risen again, I'll go before you into Galilee. And that's exactly what he did. But you know, what he's saying to the disciples is, you can be offended in me, but you can't stay offended at me. It really bothers me when people tell me I'm angry with the Lord. You have no right to be angry with the Lord. The Lord was angry with you because you are a dirty, filthy, rotten sinner. And God sent His only begotten Son to die in your place to forgive you of those sins so you could go to heaven when you die. And you're angry with God? I don't think so. Oh yeah, you might be angry for a day, but it's not going to last long. Did you ever get mad at your wife or your husband? If you're any kind of a wife and husband, it doesn't last long. I see this little advertisement on TV. These two boys are playing basketball, and the ball comes up and hits this one boy in the eye, and he's got this black eye, and they're sitting at the table, and they're looking at each other real mean, and this one boy picks up a cookie, a little round cookie, puts it on his eye like this, and starts smiling, and then the other guy puts a cookie on his eye, and he starts smiling. So they're friends again. That's the way friends are. They get mad, and they get glad, you know? I mean, I never was really angry with my wife. She may have been angry with me, but she never did tell me if she was. But I never get angry with my wife. But you know, people get angry, but they get okay. I've been upset, and I'm sure you have too, you know, with different things that happen. But we get over those things. And you know, the disciple, if you're saved by God's grace, you might get upset with what God has done in your life, or you might question something, but you're going to get over it, especially if you follow Him. See, they were following Him. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I want you to notice, if you can go over to chapter 17, verse 22. It says, and while they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them, the Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men. Verse 23 says, and they shall kill me, and the third day, they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again. And they were exceeding sorrowful. Or sorry. They were exceeding sorry. Now, why would they be sorry when the Lord said that the Son of Man will be killed and then He'll resurrect from the dead? I'll tell you why. They heard that He was going to be killed, but they didn't hear that He was going to raise again. Some kind of a way, God held that from them. Every time He told them that, they didn't hear it. They couldn't hear that. I don't know how that happened. It had to be a miracle from God for some reason, but they didn't hear that. They should have been excited. You're going to die and come back from the dead. Well, that's what happened to Lazarus. Weren't they happy when Lazarus resurrected from the dead? I think so. Even the Lord was happy when Lazarus resurrected from the dead. They didn't hear that part. But He said, I'll go before you in Galilee. And if you go over to chapter 28 later on and read it, in the early part of that chapter, you'll find out that He did go to Galilee. In verse 33 now in our text, Matthew 26, it says, Peter answered and said to Him, now here's the clincher, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. Hey boys, listen to this double negative. Don't never say never. Don't never say, what I'm saying is don't ever say never, right? Don't ever say never. I will never do that. Yeah, watch out. Because when you say that, everybody's watching you to make sure that you don't do that. And most likely you will do it, and they're going to catch you doing it. Now, I thought you said you would never do that. And that's what Peter said. He said, though all men, I mean lost people, saved people, doesn't matter. Maybe he even thought about the people in the future. I don't know. Though all men be offended, I will never be offended. He knew he loved the Lord greatly. He said, I will never be offended in you. Well, he made a mistake, of course, you know. Do you remember when Peter said, Jesus said, who do men say that I am? And then he said, who do you say that I am? And Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And boy, that was right. I mean, he got it right on. But Jesus said, you didn't say that. God said that through you. Those weren't your words. But these are Peter's words. These aren't God's words. Now Peter's in the flesh. Hey boys, we talk about the flesh and the spirit. He was in the spirit when he said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. But he was in the flesh when he said this. Though all men be offended, I will never be offended. Well, look at verse 34. Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee that this night, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice, which means 3 times. And the truth is, it's told by the Lord himself, that in this very night Peter would deny the Lord 3 times. Now I'll let you figure this out. The book of Mark says that the cock crowed twice. The other Gospels say the cock crowed. I'll let you figure that out. There's a little math in there. See if you can figure out, was it between the 2 crows of the rooster, or was it before the first one, or was it before the second one? And I'll leave that to you, okay? That's not what I'm preaching on today, but it's something to think about. That's over in Mark chapter 14. I looked it up this morning, wrote it down, but it was early in the morning. The cock crow was a time in the morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning. And believe me, I know, because I was raised on a farm, and every morning, 3 o'clock or thereabouts, that big rooster would wake me up almost every morning. And most of the time I got used to it, I didn't hear it, but sometimes he crowed extra loud, and I'd wake up. Now, notice what it says in verse 35, though. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. You know, Peter wanted everybody to believe him, so when you want somebody to believe you, not only do you say it twice, but you say it harder the second time than you did the first time. And he's going to do that again in a minute or two. He's going to say it, and he's going to say it really hard the next time. But then I want you to notice the last part of that verse. Likewise, also said all the disciples. See, sometimes we miss that. You probably should underline that in your Bible. Peter's not the only one who said that. Every one of them said, yeah, we're with Peter. We would never be offended. Not this night or not ever. We will never be offended in you. So Peter's not the only one that's guilty. He was just picked out so the Lord could teach us a lesson from Peter. But they all said the very same thing. And so all the disciples were guilty. Point number 2, the practice of the denial. Go down to verse 56 now, because there's some things that go on between there, and we pick it back up in verse 56. And it says, but all this was done, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. How many? Just Peter? No. All the disciples forsook him, and they fled. After he was arrested, they took him in. All the disciples were scared out of their wits. They didn't have that same opinion anymore, that we will not be offended in you. And it was that very night that all of them were offended in him, and they were scattered according to the prophecy. Verse 58 now says, but Peter followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. They all forsook. But where's Peter? He's following him. Isn't that something? Did that give you an idea as what's going to happen? He followed him. Maybe you're there. Maybe you're following the Lord, but you're following him far off. I never go to church. I never read my Bible. I never tell anybody about the Lord. I hardly ever pray. I think about the Lord once or twice a week. That's following the Lord afar off. You can't depend on the Lord and have true and valid faith, dependable faith on the Lord and follow Him afar off. He didn't want to be afar off. He wanted to be with the Lord, but he was still fearful. And sometimes we are. And you know, the world has always been against God's people. It's always been that way. It's not just in America, it's everywhere. If you want a good lesson, take a little trip to China down there. 80 million people were killed because of things that China was doing just in the last few years. 80 million. Of course, to them, that's just a drop in the bucket, because they got about 1.5 billion people in China. That's a lot of people. And now, I just learned this the other day. I didn't know this. You know, they were allowing only 1 child per family. Now they're allowing 3. Because they want these children to grow up to be what they want them to be. And they're having a problem with workers. Sort of like, you know, in the restaurants and the different places where we're short of work. People are not working. But these kids need to be born to grow up to do this work that the old people are not able to do anymore. And but if you want to see persecution of Christians, go to one of those eastern countries and see what that's like. And do you think that we're exempt from that? No, we're not exempt from that. People who are not Christians, in the main, I'm not talking about your neighbors and people around, I'm talking about in the main, the people in America do not like Christian people. And it's every day it gets worse. It's worse. Because that hatred is being taught in our public schools, that hatred is being taught in our colleges especially. And I know we've got a lot of good teachers and all, and I love them, and I'm glad they're doing what they're doing, but the trend is toward hating Christianity. You know why? Because Christianity has a standard, a moral standard, and the world doesn't believe in a standard. They believe whatever I want, whatever I think, that should be the law. But that's not God's law. God's law is His law, and it's never changed, and it never will change. It's always been the same. And so Peter is following him afar off. None of the other disciples followed him afar off, except one. There was one. He's a quiet sort of a fellow. Now, yesterday, you would have seen that in me. You know I'm a quiet kind of a fellow, reserved, you know, except when I'm preaching sometimes. But, you know, I was sitting there at the piano, and Morton gets up, and, you know, he's talking about all this stuff, and he has about 14,000 advertisements and trying to sell stuff and having the people to do it. And it was funny. It was a lot of fun, though. And then Brother Lace gets up, and he interrupts the Dunaways, and he steals a guitar, and he starts singing with them. And you know what he told me before that? He said, "I'm going to mess everything up here in a minute." I said, "What are you going to do?" And so he goes in there, and he gets his guitar from this guy, and he gets it on backwards, and he puts it on the other way, and he gets up there, and then at the last, and I love this part, he messed it up really bad. He got to preaching. I mean, he got to yelling and shouting and telling people how to be saved. And I said, hallelujah. But he messed it up bad. Where's Brother Wolf? I'm sitting here calm as a cucumber right there at the piano. You know, and this other disciple, he's sort of like Brother Wolf. He's quiet. Don't hear much from him. In John 18:15, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. So Peter didn't go inside the palace where John went. Now, the Bible doesn't say it was John, but it's pretty evident it was John, because, you know, John loved the Lord more than any of the other disciples did. And for some reason, Jesus loved him. And I can't imagine Jesus loving somebody, one person more than another, but it seems like there's something there between him and John, something really close. And so he knew the high priest, and so he walked right in there with Jesus. We don't hear much about him, because that's not the lesson. That's what we're supposed to do. I'm not preaching on what we're supposed to do. I'm preaching on what we should be doing, but I'm preaching about what we are doing, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We just said in Sunday school in Romans 7 about that which I would, I do not, that which I would not, that I do. And I'm always doing the wrong thing. Old Peter's a good example of that. And that's what this is all about. Now, Another passage says that, let's read another verse here. Let's go down to verse 69 and pick up the story again. And it says, Now Peter sat without in the palace. See, he wasn't inside. And a damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. Now, I looked up, I read this over in the book of Mark, and it was talking about this, and it said that Peter was beneath in the palace. They tell me this is where the ruling, like the lawyer people would sit. It was in the lower part, somewhere of the palace, and that's where Peter was, when John was inside with Jesus and with the high priest. And a young lady, a damsel, came up to him and said, you were with Jesus. I know you. You were with Jesus. She recognized him. Now verse 70 says, But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what you're talking about. Now that's my translation. I don't know what you're talking about. And that was his first denial of the Lord. He claimed ignorance of the whole thing. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who you're talking about. I have no knowledge of anything. Like, I'm the dumbest person in the world, Verse 71 says, And when he was gone out into the porch, another maid saw him, and said unto them that were there, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. So she didn't approach him. She approached the other people and said, He's one of them. And so then he goes out onto the porch there, and she tells the men there in verse 72, And again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. Now this oath, it was like somebody saying, I swear to God I don't know him. Now that's pretty serious. The Bible says not to make an oath on heaven or earth or things under the earth or anything. Don't make an oath on any of those things. And what he's saying is, if I'm wrong, and if I'm telling a lie, let God come down and punish me himself. That's the kind of oath that Peter was making. See, he started out pretty soft, then he got really hard about it, and he said, May God punish me if I'm telling a lie. He said, I know not the man. And so Peter was in a predicament. He loves the Lord with all of his heart. But he needs to save face. That's an old expression, to save face in the presence of people. Because he's not among the apostles now. He's not with the disciples now. He's out in the world. Did you know that you live a different life out there than you live here with God's people? Yeah, that's what we do. We're a bunch of hypocrites. So if you want to go to a church that has no hypocrites, don't come here. Because we're all a bunch of hypocrites. I mean, don't say you're not, because it may not be that bad, but I'm sure that in front of certain people, you either say different things, or you hesitate to say something, or you refuse to give the gospel because it's a little embarrassing, and you want to save face. So you don't say anything, or you say something different, or you believe something a little differently. Oh yeah, I believe that too. Yeah, we're all a bunch of hypocrites. You know why? Because we're all sinners. We're all sinners. Peter was a hypocrite. Well, he's a bad one. And look at verse 73. And after a while, came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee, or betrays you. Now Luke says that was 30 minutes. That space of time was 30 minutes. So that we know how long that was. So if you want to look that up, I may have put the reference in the notes. I don't know. And they came to him, those people that were standing by, and he says, Your speech bewrayeth you. And I looked up that word, the Greek word, and it means to make evident. In other words, they're saying, it's evident that you're one of them. And you know what betrayed him? His speech betrayed him. Did you know your speech will betray you? I've traveled around the eastern United States for a lot of years, gone into all kinds. And I've lived in Clarksville, Tennessee, and eastern Ohio, and now I'm in western Ohio and lived in Kentucky and been around all over the place, you know. And once in a while people will say, I can't determine where you're from by your accent. I said, I have 20 accents. I said, I've been everywhere, and I picked up a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit the other, you know. I told somebody I was from Clarksville, Tennessee. Well, you don't talk like somebody is from Clarksville, Tennessee. Well, I said, well, that's not the only place I'm from. I'm from a lot of different places. And so he was from Galilee. And he was talking to people in Jerusalem, and they said, you're one of them because you're speaking Galilean. That was a dialect. You know, that's like double negatives and ain't and all that kind of stuff, you know. And they recognized his speech. But he said, I know not the man. And you'll love this. Immediately, when he said, I know not the man, immediately the rooster crowed. Now, wasn't that something? Wasn't that a great coincidence? That the rooster would just crow? Well, you know the finger of God came down and touched that rooster and said, hey, it's about time for you to crow. And the rooster crowed and told on Peter. Told on him. Now, I've had a lot of people tell on me, but I've never had a rooster tell on me. But he told on Peter. And he told Peter on Peter. We call that conviction. When I convict myself, or when I tell on myself, that's God's conviction in my heart. Because God even told him how he was going to convict him. He said, I'm going to let the rooster crow, and it's going to convict you of what you've done. And so immediately, the cock crowed. Look at verse 75. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. That's what I would have done. That's what I would have done. And that's what each one of us should do if we find ourselves following afar off. When we find that we're following the Lord far off and we're convicted of that, the first thing we should do is weep bitterly. That's true conviction. You know, people talk about sometimes religion is too much emotionalism, and it is sometimes. But sometimes we want to get rid of emotionalism. And there shouldn't be any emotionalism. But I'm telling you, when God works in your heart, you can be emotional. Oh, Peter was a strong man. He was a fisherman. Peter was a man's man. And he went out by himself and wept bitterly. You can just imagine that in your mind, what it looked like to see Peter out there somewhere and just weeping his heart out. And he went out and wept bitterly. Some of us may need to do that today. We might need to weep bitterly because we're following the Lord afar off. I'd like to be a little bit more like John. Now, I'm going to close by going over to John 21. You know this passage real well. And the Lord does something miraculous here. Peter denied Jesus 3 times before that rooster crowed. Convicted him of his sin. And then listen to this. This is after he resurrected. So in verse 15, so when they had dined, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? Now that more than these, there have been a lot of theologians that guess all kinds of things. It could be more than the disciples, more than the world, more than whatever. It really doesn't matter. What he's saying is, Peter, do you really, really love me? He said to him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. That would be like, teach the children and the weak ones that need to be taught. Verse 16, and he said to him again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And he said to him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. And he said, feed my sheep. After they grow up a little bit, feed my sheep. Verse 17, and he said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And Peter was grieved because the Lord had said it to him the third time, lovest thou me? And he said, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee. Jesus said, feed my sheep. The Lord knew that Peter loved him. But he wanted Peter to know that Peter loved him. Do you love the Lord? 3 times. I think what he is intimating here is that he is forgiving him those 3 times for denying him. Whatever God is, he's a forgiver. And he'll forgive you of your sins, no matter how horrible they are. And I don't know how much more horrible they can get than what Peter did. But God will forgive you of your sins. And if you're lost, you've got a ton of them. You've got more than you can count, more than the stars of heaven. But if you'll come to the Lord this morning, and if you'll trust him with all of your heart, turning from your sins and putting your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, that he came and died in your place, paid for your sin debt, went to the grave, and resurrected the 3rd day, he'll forgive you of all your sins. And that's not that. It's better than that. He'll forgive you of your past sins. He'll forgive you of your present sins. And he'll forgive you of your future sins. And you will go to heaven when you die. And you'll have a privilege of following the Lord. You can follow him afar off, or you can follow him like John, just walk right into trouble with him and be right there with him, because he is definitely with us. I and you and me. So if you've not trusted the Lord, do that this morning. If you're following him afar off, get that right with God today and start following him closer and closer as you serve him. Let's stand together for prayer.